I'm awake. Guidance and support for those leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. That is the title of the new book by ExJW author Jonny Halfhead. I'm joined by Jonny today and we'll be discussing his new book and how he hopes to use it to help those leaving the Jehovah's Witness religion. That's all coming up today on the JEXIT podcast. Hi, Jonny. How are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. And it's lovely to see you and hear you.
Thank you very much. Great to see you too. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you became an ExJW.
Right. So I was born in to the Jehovah's Witnesses. I was third generation. So one of my grandparents was a Jehovah's Witness, which brought up my parents as well. So I'm quite old and wrinkly. So I was born in 1970 and I had to leave my home. My mother took me out when I was 19. So at the end of, in roughly 1990, because of a few indiscretions that she didn't like. So I became an ex-Jehovah's Witness, not by much choice, really. A lot of circumstances put me there. And then I've been out for quite a few decades and had to come to terms with a lot of it over a long period of time.
So 1990s when you left. Now, the ExJW community as it is today, as I imagine, is leaps and bounds ahead of where it was in 1990 in terms of information you had access to, support. What was it like leaving the organization at that time?
I had absolutely nothing. It's hard to explain to the younger generation who have been brought up with the internet how difficult it used to be to get any information. You couldn't go to your local library and find anything to do with Jehovah's Witnesses, especially not out in the countryside where I lived. You might have been lucky to get something in a city library, but generally you just didn't have any information at all. And you were too frightened anyway. I mean, most ex-witnesses will know what it's like. If you try to read anything that goes against the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's apostate material. So you've got that inbuilt as well. So you so struggle to go and find any information. It's such a wonderful world today. It's fantastic. The whole world is just a click away, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, I can imagine how difficult it must have been then. What was it like in terms of support? Did you have ExJW friends or any kind of community that understood your circumstances and what you were going through at the time?
So when my mother threw me out, because my mother threw me out and she was a good, upstanding Jehovah's Witness, that all the congregation and my family thought that they should keep their distance from me, because I must have done something really bad and something really evil to have had that put upon me. So nobody helped, practically nobody. So the only place I could go was to my disfellowship father, who hadn't known for quite a number of years, and he kindly took me in. But the strain of that was, he was the only person really that I knew, because all of my family, all of my friends, and I'd lost my job as well, so I had no work colleagues. I knew absolutely nobody, and I was totally on my own. It was a horrible place to be.
I can imagine what it's like, because I've been through it myself. But fortunately, I went through it only in the last 5 years, where things are very, very different from what they were in the early 90s. It must have been an incredibly lonely time for you.
I had absolutely nothing at all. I didn't want to go and talk to worldly people because they were evil. And I was frightened of them, and I didn't know. I was waiting to be taken advantage of because that's what the world will do. I was stupid and naive. I'd been brought up as a witness to the point that I knew nothing of the real world at all. And of course, my faith had been battered. And I was on the verge of totally losing everything I knew and all my reality on top of that. I started to question and see things even more than I had before. So it's a whole world that falls down. It was not a nice place to be at all. And nowadays, it's mental health is well known about, and people are advised to go and try and seek counselling and go to the NHS and things like that. But in 1990, I didn't know about anything at all. I didn't know anything in the outside world of what was there for support or who could help me. All my support network was where I'd come from, my family, and I didn't have them anymore.
So how did you survive through this experience? How did you come out of that and turn your life around?
At the same time of losing everything, if you've got nothing and you really have absolutely nothing, you've got nothing to lose. So anything you want to do with your life, you've got a possibility of going out and doing. And I had some wild, crazy dreams of what I could do. And I thought, what can I possibly lose by trying? I think I tried to commit suicide because I was so low. And facing that near-death experience, I think, gave me a new lease of life, weirdly, because I made a comparison with everything. Anything I was going to do, is it as worse as death, as bad as death? And that gave me a comparison of nothing is. Nothing, what can possibly be worse than death? So anything I could try and do was always going to be a positive. And it's only now I look back on it and I think, wow, how did I manage to do that?
Wow. Can I say that is an amazing example of turning absolutely tragic negative circumstances into something positive? I mean, you use that horrible experience that you're going through as a springboard into, turning your life into something great, because the risks were very low because you had nothing to lose. And I think that is just an amazing outlook and perspective on life. I mean, that's something that everybody can benefit from, adopting that approach, whether you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness or not. I think that it really is a testament to your character that you were able to see things that way.
I can't believe I did it. It's very strange looking back and thinking, where the heck did that come from? Because, like I say, I was at such a low and I had nothing left. I was totally empty. So even if I can impart just that little bit of something, that there is a way out, and actually you're in a position where the whole world has just opened up to you. You've got absolutely nothing to lose by just trying. I find it more difficult now to try than I did then, which is really strange.
So tell us about your book and what you hope to accomplish with it.
So I've kept up a promise to myself that I would try to write one book a year. And last year I left it very, very late. I always had an idea that I wanted to do like a help and support guide for people that were leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. Everything else I've done has either been autobiographical or it's been fiction. And I just thought maybe there's a good time now where there's quite different support networks out there and people like yourself who are really helping. So why not try to bring some of them in, and I can give some of my opinion as well. And my favorite thing about my new book is the fact that I've just said, look, it's just my opinion, and it can be totally and utterly wrong. You know, the cool thing is you can have an opinion too. You know, just go out and get it. Anything that I say in the book, just go and check for yourself. Because I was having such an argument with myself about who am I to give advice to somebody else, because I'm just a regular person. So who am I to give advice? But then why not? Why am I not the person to help and give advice? So the whole point of the book is to just try and get it out there, just to get people to read it. Because if it can help just one person, the whole point of the book has been fulfilled. I don't need to do anything else except write another one next year.
That's a really great mission. That is really great. I mean, that's the first thing that struck me when I read it, is that it has a very different approach from your previous works. Your previous books were fictional, semi-fictional. This is more like a guide for people who are either just starting to question their faith or have just left. There's definitely a need for something like that, you know, in the ExJW community. What inspired you to take this new approach with your writing?
It's been 33 years since I tried to commit suicide because of the effect that leaving or being pushed out of the Jehovah's Witnesses had on my life. And I am still coming across lots of people who are in exactly the same place and are so down and so depressed and in such a dark place that even though there is help out there, it doesn't seem like people don't feel like they can get it, or it's easy to get to. And people are still, young people especially, people are still dying, which is horrific. And to think we've progressed as a society 30 years on from 1990, and yet we are still facing exactly the same dilemma, the same traumas as 30 years ago. So it was just, if I can save one life, that everything is done. You know, I've achieved everything I wanted to with this book. So I just want to get it out there to as many people as possible, because if it can help anybody at all, then that's exactly what it's for.
Yeah, that's a really noble goal to aspire to. And I'm sure, no doubt, that you will achieve it. Have you had any feedback on from people who have read it already?
There's a lady called Linda who has become a fan of mine since reading this book. I mean, she liked my books before, but she absolutely loves it. She can't believe how much it's hit and resonated with her on every page, to the point that I've given her a load of free ones because she's gone out and just given it away all over the place. She's given it to solicitors, she's given it to the police, she's given it to some nurses, she's given it out anywhere where it can show people how difficult it is for people to leave this religion. And the fact that it's mine, I can't believe it. I'm dumbfounded. I'm absolutely dumbfounded. So it's already, I think, accomplished the task.
That's really great to hear. I think that's actually a good segue into me sharing with you some of the things that I particularly liked in the book. Page 30. Now, this section is entitled View from the Outside. This particular paragraph really resonated with me. I'll just read it. It says, one significant thing that sometimes takes years to learn once outside is how insignificant the Jehovah's Witnesses are in the outside world. The organization teaches us that God's work is so important that knowledge of Jehovah and his organization will reach the whole world, triggering the end of the end, Armageddon. Many of us carry that conceit with us even when we leave the organization. That really hit home to me. It really, really did. Because what you say is 100% accurate. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, you are the center of the universe. Every single thing that happens in the world is about you. If not you individually, it's about your religion, your faith community, the organization. And thinking back to my childhood, whenever anything major happened in the news, my immediate thoughts were, this is about us. This is about us. I don't know if you've ever seen that old movie, Clash of the Titans, not the new remakes that they did a few years back, but the old ones where they have like the clay models, like the stop motion animation. I love that movie, by the way. But there were scenes in that movie with the gods of Olympus playing chess with people. Like there were clay models of the people whose lives they were influencing and manipulating. Like they were all pawns on a chessboard. And I literally thought that was what it was like being a Jehovah's Witness in the world. I thought that when things happen in the world, it was Satan moving pieces around this universal chessboard with the American government over here and the British government over there. And when they made this decision or changed this law or made this policy, it was Satan and his demons moving the pieces around. And it was all about positioning them to attack us. Do you have similar thoughts on that?
I do. I remember being in my late teens. I was often thinking about things like the CIA in America. You know, they're they've got so many intelligent sources. Surely they should know about our version of the Bible as a Jehovah's Witness. Surely they must know about it. And if they don't, maybe I should write them a letter. Maybe I should tell them, because they can perhaps stop some of the things that's going to set Armageddon off, and they could delay it because they've got the intelligence to do that. And I honestly thought, wouldn't that be great just to get a letter off to the CIA, so at least they can decide not to pick on the Jehovah's Witnesses or something like that, and delay Armageddon at least to save more lives. Yeah. But on that same point as well, isn't it interesting how many people I've spoken to as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that are still ashamed to be ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or for anybody to know about it, because they think it's such a big deal out there in the world that if people knew that they were former Jehovah's Witnesses, the amount of ridicule they're going to get. And yet you come to realize over a couple of decades when you're out that nobody knows anything about the witnesses. It's so insignificant and small that a lot of ex-witnesses still carry that with them. Bless them.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there are a lot of truths that you learn when you leave the organization. And that is one of the biggest ones, that the world does not care about Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses are not on anybody's radar. There are no situation rooms in any government where there are generals sitting around a table speaking about Jehovah's Witnesses. It's just complete fantasy. We just don't register on anybody's map whatsoever. That the world doesn't care about Jehovah's Witnesses. And I remember one thing in particular from when I was a kid, when they changed the law regarding when someone's arrested and they get read their rights. In the past, it was you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to legal representation, blah, blah, blah. But I can't remember what year it was, but there was a point at which they changed it. And after that change, it read, you do not have to say anything unless you wish to do so, but you may harm your defense if you don't mention when questioned something that you later rely on in court. So it was very different from just the very short and sweet, you have the right to remain silent. And when that happened, and I saw that in the news, I was convinced that law was changed to trap us when the great tribulation comes, so that if we're arrested because we're Jehovah's Witnesses and preaching is banned and whatever, remaining silent would harm our defense. And that would be one of the ways in which they would try to catch us or throw us in prison. And all of this was orchestrated by Satan. That was, I was convinced of it. I was 100% convinced of it. And now I look back on that and laugh, because I genuinely understand now how insignificant Jehovah's Witnesses are to the world in general. And as a witness, we thought that, okay, we're a worldwide religion. This good news is being preached throughout the world, to every tribe, nation, and tongue, except maybe places in the Middle East and in Asia, where few are there. But you could literally go into parts of the Western world where people have never heard of Jehovah's Witnesses, or heard of them, but never spoken to them, or have no idea what they believe. Right here in the UK, there are people like that.
There are lots. Again, this is another inspiration for why I did this book, because the general public don't generally know anything about the Jehovah's Witnesses. And the people that do read this will be so shocked of how difficult it is to leave, and how much of a hold it has on people, and what they do to their followers and how they control them, that actually this is just a book that's just as important for people who don't know about the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is the vast majority. I've tried to use, there's an app called Neighbours. Is it Neighbour? Something like that, anyway. And I've been basically leaving copies in public places, like Sainsbury's on the book club, the book tables that they have, and just leaving it there for people to go and pick up, because I think people need to know, because they know nothing about the Jehovah's Witnesses. They barely know about somebody who knocks on the door, or the unusual people that stand and don't talk about anything with a book, a list of books and the shopping centre. But apart from that, they know nothing about them at all. And I think word does need to get out in order to be able to protect people and perhaps stop them from either joining up or at least helping support people that they know are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses.
I 100% agree with you. And I think part of the reason why that is the case is because when you see witnesses in public, or people that know witnesses, like maybe a work colleague or a neighbor, witnesses are generally nice and friendly people. And I think that fact really helps the whole organization to fly under the radar as a cult, because people think of cults as being very intimidating to look at, or scary, or unapproachable. And witnesses are just not like that at all. So people don't realize how bad the organization is.
Yeah. And of course, the majority of them are getting older now as well. So it's them nice old grannies that come round and knock on your door. Or like you say, I really don't want to bring reproach on those people, because the majority, like you say, the majority of witnesses are sweet, caring, kind, loving people. They're just deluded. They just don't see anything of the outside world. And they don't know the dangers that's lurking within their own organization as well. So, yeah, and anything that can get any of this information out is worth doing and worth putting the effort in for, especially if I've got the nerve to do it, because I'm lucky in the fact I've still got that I've got nothing to lose mentality. So if I feel that way and I'm willing to stick my neck out, I might as well do it, because I've got the nerve to do it. So that's why I do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And like I said, I completely agree with you. Word does need to get out. And there's some really, really great work being done by activists, in all over the world, but particularly in Scandinavia, where the organization is really not having a good time there due to the work of ex-Jehovah's Witness activists who are really bringing the harmful and destructive policies of the organization to light. And there are a few of us here who are trying to affect similar kinds of change here as well, but it is really, really difficult. It is really difficult. There is a real sense of deference to religious organizations in Western Europe, which is sad. And it just means that a lot of them can just get away with literally murder in some cases. I'm not saying that that's the case with Jehovah's Witnesses, but, as an organization, they do get away with so much.
They certainly do. Yeah, it's hard to say they don't get away with murder, but when there are so many people that commit suicide that leave because of the shunning policy, or people have died for the blood doctrine, which is an easy thing to try and pick on. I always used to hate it when people from outside the witnesses used to pick on the blood doctrine. It's okay if the faith is worth it, but when you figure out that actually when you see the world outside, it isn't actually worth it, then it puts questions like dying for just not having a blood transfusion into serious doubt. And it is, people do die because of the doctrines, which is so sad.
Yeah, it is really sad. I mean, that one in particular, it's so unnecessary because it's a complete misunderstanding of that scripture in the first place. I mean, regardless of whether or not you believe the Bible is holy and inspired, you can't argue with the fact that whoever wrote that scripture was not talking about blood transfusions because they didn't exist then. It wasn't about medical procedures, so it really, really is an overreach, on the part of the organization to interpret it that way. It's just pure opinion, and it's sad. I vaguely remember reading a statistic. I mean, feel free to anyone listening to fact check me on this, but I think blood transfusions have saved more lives than any other medical procedure. I vaguely remember reading a statistic like that.
That's why it's very important. Yeah, because if young people, are taking that decision when they've got the rest of their lives in front of them, I suppose it's a bit like baptism as well. I'm shocked at how such a serious decision like baptism is taken at such a young age, and it seems to have got worse over the last couple of decades. It's a life commitment. You wouldn't get married at 9 years old, so why would you allow a child to decide to get baptized at 9 years old? It's a life choice and a life commitment that has terrible ramifications. And to some point, I think that that's one of those things that should be made illegal. If it's a life decision, if it's a life contract, you should not be allowed to make it at age 9. You shouldn't be allowed to make it at age 15. You barely know yourself at 18, and that's bad enough. But yeah, the witnesses seem to be so desperate to get young people baptized and into the fold and onto the statistics. I think they're pushing, their reach is going a little bit too far recently.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do think that this renewed focus on getting people baptized as early as possible, I do think that's a response to their dwindling numbers. Because the younger you can get them and trap them, the higher your chances of keeping them in the long term. And because it is so hard to leave as well, I think, again, this is just speculation on my part, but I really do think that is at least partly the reason why. Another thing that I found really good and commendable about your book was page 45, which was the section methods of leaving, and in brackets or not. The reason why I say that is because as much as I dislike this organization, dislike this religion, and in an ideal world, it wouldn't exist, leaving the religion isn't for everyone. It's not going to be beneficial in the long term to absolutely everyone. There are some people, some cases, who feel that they are, even if they know it's not the truth, they feel that it's better for them to stay in than to move out. And I think it's really commendable that you, as an ex-Jehovah's Witness, who for all intents and purposes should be hell-bent on getting everybody out of the religion, acknowledges that. I think that is really, really commendable. And it flies in the face of the stereotypical apostate trope that the organization likes to perpetuate, which is completely untrue anyway. But I just think it was a really, really good thing for you to include information like this in your book. Do you just want to expand on the reasons why you did that?
Well, how can I personally know somebody else's personal circumstances? Everybody has their own set of conditions and stresses, and there's a chap that I know who, his parents are elderly, and he doesn't want to rock the boat with them because they've been in for so long. Why would he push them to, lose their religion or to have their doubts at such a late age? That he's just treading carefully with them and playing it safe, which is totally commendable because he's doing that through love. And how can you say anything bad against somebody who does it from the love of the heart? You can't. All you can do is just commend them for what they're doing. Like you say, everybody has different personal circumstances. It's not black and white. It's not 1 and 0. There's humongous amounts of different greys in between. So yeah, somebody might find that the life that they need is to still be there. But the good thing is, if they're questioning, it's almost like the rotten apple scenario that they used to give out in the Watchtower and Awake. It's great because if you've got some questions, somebody with questions there, it cannot help but rub off onto others that are still there. If somebody leaves, they become an apostate, and anything they say will just be looked on as just apostate rubbish and lies and part of the world. But if somebody is in and they're genuinely good people and they're still associated with the rest of the congregation, and they have even the smallest of doubts or any questions, all that can do is help enlighten the people that are there in that congregation. And that's great. That's, I think you can probably do more good being in than some of us can spend our lives that we're out trying to convince people in there of what reality is.
That's such a great attitude to have. And to me, the thing is that the hallmark of being a Jehovah's Witness isn't necessarily being in the religion, going to the Kingdom Hall, going on the ministry. To me, it essentially comes down to the way that you think. And it's a hallmark of cults that there are no gray areas. Everything is black and white. There are false dichotomies absolutely everywhere. There's no nuance. Nuance doesn't exist. So for the fact that you have this approach of, well, this is what life looks like for me, it might not necessarily be a good thing for it to look like that for you. That shows that you've left that cult mindset behind. But there are a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who don't. There are a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who are like, if you're leaving the organization, this is how you have to do it. First of all, you have to leave the organization, and then you have to leave it in this particular way. So even though they're out of the religion, they still think like they're in it because they still have this mindset of there's only one truth, there's only one way to do things, there's only one way to be. And I think overcoming that way of thinking is one of the hardest challenges of extricating yourself from an organization like the Jehovah's Witnesses.
There's so many ways that you can go forward in a person's life based on their own circumstances. To just, like you say, to just say you must leave. It's like the similar thing with the letter of disassociation. I think if it's a mental thing that's good for you personally, to put a blocker to say, this is it, I'm finishing, I'm writing this letter for me, and it doesn't matter if I send it to the elders or not, but I might do. That's got to be a good thing, but it's a personal choice. In a way, writing a letter is giving them power, because you're saying that you actually respect the fact that they need a letter for you to say, I'm not doing it anymore. When actually, if you don't care, it doesn't matter. They have no power over you, so why give them the power by writing a letter to them? So there are swings and roundabouts. Like you say, there's lots of grey areas. Only you yourself can know your own personal circumstances. To do something like you lose your whole family or access to your own children is a devastating thing to look at, or the possibility to look at. But then on the other hand, it would be really difficult to stay in the congregation when your heart's not with it anymore. If you are totally out, it's such a difficult game you have got to play, and such a tightrope you've got to walk, that you could argue that you're not going to be true to yourself anymore, and you will harm yourself in the long run. So it's such a difficult thing to do, and I think it's only healthy to reflect the fact that there's many choices and many ways to go, and it's your own personal journey.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think it comes down to, as well, a person's reasons for being in the religion in the first place. They're not the same for everyone. For some people, truth is paramount, and they're in this organization because they genuinely believe it is the truth. So for people like that, when they find out it's not the truth, leaving is an easy decision for them to make. It might not be an easy process to go through, but the mental decision is, right, I'm going to leave. That, for them, that's easy. But not everyone is like that. Some people are in the religion mainly for the community, for the sense of community and fellowship that they get, whether or not it's the truth. I mean, they might still believe it's the truth, but if they found that it wasn't, it probably wouldn't make much of a difference to them. But still, as long as they could still go to the Kingdom Hall and see all of their friends and family, So you can't really come down on one side or another for every single person. It's going to be different for each individual, and I think it's really good that you speak to that in your book.
So thank you very much. It blows me away when it's so difficult to accept praise, isn't it? I always struggle with my books to get them to understand that people accept them, and again, that's something that I've brought from being a witness, that I'm never good enough, that I'll never be good enough. So it's really unusual when somebody gives me any praise. I just feel,
I know, I am exactly the same way. 100% exactly the same way. My wife has really helped to try and get me out of that pattern. I mean, she does praise me a lot, and she tries to encourage me to praise myself, which is a totally novel concept for me. Praising myself, that's haughty. You know what I mean? But yeah, these are the things that we have to struggle with. Another thing that really resonated with me was on page 84, under the section falling into another cult. This is a topic that I am extremely passionate about. I've already touched on it in my comments earlier, but as I said, if you do decide to leave the organization, stopping attending meetings, calling yourself an ExJW, disassociating yourself, or even being disfellowship. You can do all of those things and still be a Jehovah's Witness if you think the same way. And thinking in the same way means that now that you're out of the organization, you're vulnerable to other cultic groups because they all work in essentially the same way, or they have commonalities, regardless of the group, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or Seventh-day Adventists, or even a group that is completely non-religious. There are commonalities between all of them, especially the ones that are on the high control end of the spectrum. So unless you work to change that way of thinking, you know, the most susceptible person to falling into a cult is someone who's just left one, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's something that I did. You lose your tribe. And it's one of the big things that I miss about being a Jehovah's Witness is the community. We used to have a community where we used to have 50 or 60 people go out walking in the countryside together, and it was absolutely fantastic. I miss that so much. And you look and you think, well, why can't I find that anywhere else in a way? And it's because you're kind of thrown together and you're forced to accept people the way they are in a certain way. You know, if you're out in the modern world, you kind of find your own little cliques and, you know, connections, but there's generally if I don't like them, I just won't associate with them anymore. Whereas in the congregation, you're kind of forced together. You're kind of forced to see the same people over and over again, which is useful and gives you that community. And that's one of the things that I do miss quite a lot. So when I'd gone from the Witnesses, I had absolutely no tribe at all. I had nobody I belonged to. And I loved goth music. And that became, in a weird way, my new cult. I ended up following it obsessively, and a little bit over the top, to the point that I didn't want to know people who were into other types of music because the goths were a bit of a clique and they kept to themselves and they didn't want to have anything to do with anybody outside. And if you stopped going out, everybody kind of just lost interest in you. So I ended up falling into something that was pretty much the same. But then that also gave me a life experience to see a cult for what it is. And I see cults everywhere now. Sometimes it's a thorn in my side because I see it too much. I see a lot of workplaces are very cult-like. You know, you can't just go to work and do your job. You've got to be in. You've got to be in with the company. You've got to love it, you know, and you've got to follow it, and you've got to be all in. Otherwise, you're left on the outside. And it's, like I say, there's so many areas that I see exactly the same thing, which is a good thing. But then it's also another trait of being an ex-Jehovah's Witness is you overanalyze everything. So I see the cults and then I overanalyze it, and then I don't want to join anything because everything looks like a cult. Yeah.
That's really funny, but it's so true. It really is true. I mean, I'm the same. I've always been an overanalyzer, you know, ever since I was a kid. But being an ExJW now, I do see cults absolutely everywhere. And one red flag that I'm particularly sensitive to is people or groups of people or organizations that don't see nuance, that see everything as a false dichotomy, black and white. Even if it's just one person, if they have that mindset of it's either this or it's that, all I want to do is just run. I just want to run a mile, you know. And unfortunately, I do think that way of thinking is becoming more the norm. especially where it relates to politics and socio-political issues. I think a lot of people have this black and white, way of thinking about things, and it's making the world very, very tribal. And you're either on this side of the political spectrum or you're on that side, and whichever side you're on, you have to believe and agree with 100% of what your side thinks, says, and does. And I think it's sad that people fall into that, because to me, somebody who's like that doesn't really think for themselves, because human beings are so different from each other, from one person to the next. There's no such thing as the average person, because everyone is like a species unto themselves. So there's no way that two people can agree on absolutely everything. It's just impossible. So when people do that, the way I reconcile that is by saying, well, they're not thinking for themselves, they're just adopting someone else's thoughts.
Yeah, I like to think that I become a lot of times I become a devil's advocate. I like to hear people's opinion, but I also like to bring up, oh, have you thought about this? But a lot of people do find that a little bit aggressive sometimes, because I want to know why they think like that. What's the root? Where does it come from? Where's the source? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this other way of thinking? I do get into some interesting discussions with people sometimes, probably because I don't like to have a set opinion. To me, opinion is fluidic. You should be able to change it all the time. That's the beauty of the world, when you find new inputs and new things to learn about and to think about. There's a couple of quotes that is in the book about where is it Einstein, that said something along the lines of, the more I know, or the more I learn, the less I know. And that's so true. But then I also understand that the majority of people like to be told what to do. They might not think they do, but they like the comfort of having an authoritative figure make the decisions and to guide them, and to not have to. We're terrible. My brain never shuts up. I'm constantly questioning everything. I'm constantly analysing. So I can understand why people like to have a quieter mind, and I can't shut my mind off. But then in some ways that's a blessing. I can kind of use that to shine light in sometimes. But then sometimes I need to just shut up.
Yeah, I totally get that. I totally get that. And I think it's a symptom of the modern world that we live in, where we seem like we're really, really connected. I mean, technologically, like you said earlier, the whole world is just a click away. So in that sense, we're more connected than ever, but people are more lonely. People, I don't think people have ever felt more distanced from other people to the point where we want to form bonds with people on things that historically we never have, like political opinions or music, sports teams, brands of phone, even. I mean, there's that whole Apple versus Android thing. I think that's people looking for community. I think that's what it ultimately comes down to. People are looking for community in those kinds of things because they feel so disconnected and cut off from other people, and they're forming these communities at a really visceral way, at a very guttural level, and that breeds hostility towards other people who aren't in that community. So, I just feel like the world is becoming more and more tribal about more and more different things, novel things that haven't really been the case historically.
But then in the same way, we've also become non-tribal. I was talking to somebody the other day about youth culture, how when it comes to music, especially, there hasn't been any real youth culture in nearly 30 years now. They just, you feel for young people because they don't have much in the way of tribal identity. Yeah, when I was young, every 3 years you had a new trend and a new music trend, and then or there were several going off at the same time. But then that tribalism was always quite violent. You had your punks and your skinheads, fighting each other, or your rockers and your what was the other? Yeah, the Teddy Boys.
Mods.
Yeah, the mods and the rockers. That's it. Used to fight each other. So at least there's not that. I mean, nowadays, I find it incredible that basically anybody can be into any music, which is great, because when I was young, half of my music taste you had to hide, because if people knew about it, you got beaten up. It was the era of punk, and why I liked a lot of the punk stuff, I also liked prog stuff, prog rock, and you did not admit in public that you liked prog rock. You just didn't, because that was flared trousers and So Yesterday. And you would have got beaten up for that. So yeah, that we do have some, as with all things, some things change, and then some things don't. Swings and roundabouts. But I know what you mean. You're expected to have an opinion on everything. One of the things I've not got an opinion of at the moment is world affairs. I've stopped watching the news, because when the Ukraine war started, I got so frightened again, it triggered me because of Armageddon. And it still happens even now. But I realize that's me watching the news. I'm obsessed with watching the news because that's what you did as a witness when you were young. So I've stopped watching it. I've had to stop watching it, which also means I've had to stop having an opinion on the news, which is a good thing in some way, because I'm opinionated enough already, so I don't need to know anymore.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. I had exactly the same reaction to the outbreak of the Ukraine war. I had a panic attack at work in front of people, and it was so embarrassing, So the war had just broken out, and I was at work, and in the office that I worked in at the time, they would have the news on 24/7 on the radio. And Rishi Sunak, he was the chancellor at the time. He was giving, speaking about the rising cost of living crisis. And I was listening to him as he was talking, and he was painting a very bleak picture of the future, how much energy was going to cost and food. And it just terrified me. The whole thing just terrified me. And although the pandemic wasn't was essentially over, COVID was still around. So it was like pestilence, war, and the rising cost in living, like the trifecta, the Armageddon trifecta had just been hit. And I just had this scripture playing over and over in my mind. A quart of wheat for a denarius, and don't harm the oil or the wine or something like that, the scripture said. And it just made me think of that. And then I just lost it. I just completely lost it. Had a full breakdown, meltdown in the office at work. And it was horrendous.
I was in a similar position, kind of. There was talk of nuclear war from Russia. And I went to bed, and I woke up at 2:00 in the morning thinking I need to start taking the doors off the hinges and start creating a den in the spare room, ready for nuclear fallout, because we're not going to have time if it starts soon. And I just thought, yeah, it's gone too far. I was literally going to get up and start doing it. I was going to get my screwdriver and start taking the doors off. And I was like, I suddenly realized I caught myself thinking, what am I doing? I'm in this Armageddon mindset again. But the interesting thing, one of the things I've realized over the last few years is I think that our Western society has caught on to the doomsday Christian way of controlling people through fear. And I think our governments and capitalism is finding it very profitable to keep people frightened and in fear of what's coming. Everything is about doomsday to the point that I've never known anything like it before. And again, you start to see that cult parallel with, control the masses by just pumping them full of fear so that they'll go out and spend the money and build the barricades and, hoard themselves in. And yeah, it makes for better consumers and for better voters, I think. So yes, I try to keep out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same with the organization. It's a common control tactic throughout all of human history, whether you're talking about religion or politics or even families. Fear. Fear is a great motivator. It's a great way of motivating people because our brains are wired for self-preservation. So we will literally do anything to keep ourselves safe from the dangers that we are scared of. And it's no secret that people have worked that out and have used that to their advantage, and they've been doing it for centuries, thousands of years even. That may be even how the first religion even started.
Yeah, very likely. Yeah, like you say, it's just control. So one of the best ways I've found to try and stop myself feeling that fear is just to stop watching the news. I've stopped watching it. Occasionally I see something and it's the same roller coaster. It just seems to be going round and round in circles. Yeah. So I'm kind of glad to get off that circle. Just going round and round with it. And I do feel better for stopping watching the news all the time.
That's great. I'm sure you do. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, Jonny, as always. We've done these interviews several times before, and this one is of an even higher standard. You haven't failed to disappoint. So please tell us where we can find information about your book or purchase it or connect with you.
Okay, it's quite easy. Because I've got such a unique name, Jonny Halfhead. Halfhead is all one word, and JONNY is Jonny. Search for me anywhere online and you will likely find me. But all my books are on Amazon. So if you go on Amazon, you'll find all my books there. And I'm quite easy to find and to get in touch with if anybody wants to get in touch with me, which I would love to hear from people.
Thank you very much. So I'll be sure to include links to all of your books in the show notes, including this one.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. You're a superstar.
No, thank you. The pleasure's all mine. And that is it for this week's episode of the Jexit podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, share, comment, and also subscribe so that you're alerted each time a new episode is posted. Thanks again for tuning in and have a great week.